It was in the quiet, after a storm of months, that I finally heard the truth. I wasn't expecting it. Truth rarely comes when we're ready. It breaks in, like light through a crack in the door, sharp, uninvited, undeniable. That morning, I had parked 2 blocks away from the therapist's office. I needed the walk. I needed time to breathe, to prepare myself for what had become a routine of polite torture. Watching the woman I once loved twist every word into a weapon, smiling as she handed the blade to the therapist with the same care she used to fold our son's baby clothes. She always said it was for the good of our child. Every restriction, every accusation, every cold look across the room. "It's about protecting him," she would say, and her voice had that tone, that deliberate calm that makes people nod and agree without really thinking. It wasn't rage. Rage would have been easier to fight. No, it was conviction. That unshakable tone that made everyone believe she was the sane one, the good one. And me? The man who had once rocked his son to sleep with cracked hands after a double shift. I became the problem, the dangerous one, the unstable ex, the man whose presence was emotionally confusing to a 6-year-old boy who still kept my picture under his pillow. That day, I sat on the couch in that warm, too-silent room. The beige walls, the aroma of lavender from the essential oils. On the corner table, the sound of the clock ticking like a metronome measuring my restraint. Everything was familiar, except for what was coming. Our son was there. He sat between us. Small shoulders, big eyes, clutching that blue dinosaur. Plush I gave him when he was 4. The therapist, Dr. Carson, had suggested he try to speak today. In his own words, my ex didn't flinch. She looked serene. Maybe too serene. He asked him a simple question. "Can you tell me what you feel when you're with Mom? And when you're with Dad?" And just like that, the floor under my reality began to tremble. But before I tell you what he said, the sentence that changed everything, maybe you need to understand how we got here. She wasn't always like this. Or maybe she was, and I was too in love, too hopeful, to see it. We met in Seattle. I was 27, working as a project coordinator for a mid-size construction company, still paying off student loans, still thinking love was the answer to every bruise life gave us. She walked into my life like a calm fire, soft-spoken, steady, always knowing what to say. She had this way of making chaos feel like order. And for a man who had grown up in a house of slammed doors and glass arguments, that kind of stability felt like salvation. We moved fast. Married within a year. Our son came 2 years later. I remember the way she looked at him the night he was born, as if he were made of glass and light. And I thought, maybe this is it. This is the version of love that saves us. But something shifted after he turned 4. Maybe it was the pressure, or maybe it was that I started working longer hours, trying to cover more than our bills could handle. Maybe it was me, the way I came home too tired to talk, the way I withdrew when I felt overwhelmed. I know I wasn't perfect, but I never expected her to turn distance into a war dot. It started with suggestions. Maybe it's better if you don't pick him up on weekdays. He gets overstimulated. Let's try co-parenting with more structure. Routines are good for kids. Then came the narratives. He cries after being with you. He seems anxious. He says you shout. The worst part? I began doubting myself. Gaslighting isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. It says, "You forgot again, didn't you? You promised." Even when you DIDN single quotes T, my parents started asking questions. Friends stepped back. Every space she entered, she filled with a version of the story that placed her firmly in the role of protector, and me in the role of threat. Even when I brought emails, messages, photos, evidence to court, it didn't matter. Her calm, dismantled my desperation. In family law, emotion can look like instability, and the more I tried to defend myself, the guiltier I seemed. But I never stopped showing up. Birthdays, school recitals. The weekends I was allowed. The holidays I negotiated like a beggar, bargaining for hours instead of coins. I stayed close to him, my boy, even from far away. I wrote him letters I never sent. Recorded bedtime stories he could listen to on his tablet. I showed up even when it broke me, and slowly I began to notice cracks in the image she built. The way he clung to me longer when I dropped him off. The way his drawings always had 3 figures, not 2. The way he once whispered, "Mom says not to talk about you too much." They were small things, easy to miss, but I was trained to notice the details. My job had taught me that. A crack in the foundation always reveals itself. You just have to know where to look. I started writing it all down. Every sentence, every date. I kept a record not for the court, but for myself, so I wouldn't forget the truth. And then came the invitation to therapy, initiated by her. To help him express more, she said, so he can feel safe. I agreed, because I knew. Truth has a way of slipping through even the tightest grip. And in that session, when Dr. Carson asked that gentle question, when he turned to my son with that patient, encouraging smile, I didn't breathe. I just watched. And then my son turned to the therapist and said 9 words that tore the air from the room. Can I say what I said to the wall? The silence that followed his question was different, not empty, not awkward. It was the kind of silence that stretches out and presses against your ribs, the kind that makes your own heartbeat sound loud. Even Dr. Carson leaned in slightly, careful not to startle the moment. Yes, he said softly. You can say what you said to the wall. My son hesitated. He looked down at the blue dinosaur in his lap, thumb tracing the frayed seam on its belly. Then, slowly, almost as if reciting something he'd practiced in private, he said, I told the wall that I pretend to like when I'm at Mommy's house, because when I don't, she cries. I didn't move. He didn't say it with malice. There was no anger, no intention to hurt. It was just truth. Pure, unscripted, childlike truth, the kind you can't coach, the kind that doesn't ask for attention, just release. She shifted in her seat. Not much, just a tightening of the jaw, the subtle straightening of her spine. But I noticed, and so did Dr. Carson. And how does that make you feel? The therapist asked. My son shrugged, like I'm not supposed to be happy unless she is. That's when I felt it, the slow crumbling of the story she had built like a snow-covered rooftop starting to sag under its own weight. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look at her. My eyes were on him, my boy. Speaking at last. Took everything in me not to cry, because deep down I had always feared this, that he was being taught to protect her emotions at the cost of his own, that his small heart was being asked to carry a burden meant for broken adults. And the more I thought about it, the more I began to remember things I had ignored, like the time he said, Mom says I need to be strong for her, or the moment, months ago, when I picked him up and he asked, do I have to tell her I had fun with you? Like he was afraid that loving me would hurt her. There had been signs all along, but when you're drowning, it's hard to see the shape of the wave. You only feel the weight, the pull. I had told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe I was too emotional, too reactive, that maybe I was the problem. But now, in this small beige room, lit by afternoon light slanting through the blinds, the truth was sitting in front of me, clutching a blue dinosaur and trying to make sense of adult sadness with a 6-year-old vocabulary. He didn't want to choose between us. He just wanted peace. I could see it in his eyes, the fatigue, the same weariness I had once seen in the mirror during the worst days of our marriage. And she was staring at the floor now, no longer in control of the narrative. And for the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in her in a long time. Fear. It was faint, but it was there. In the way she swallowed hard and blinked too long. Like she was realizing that maybe, just maybe, this child she had tried to shape into her shield had stepped out from behind the armor and was speaking. Not for her. Not for me, but for himself. And it was only the beginning, because what he said next would unravel everything. Dr. Carson didn't say anything right away. He glanced at me, just briefly, then at her. Her eyes were fixed on the corner of the rug, as if tracing the edge of it could reverse time. What did you tell the wall next? He asked gently. My son didn't answer right away. He shifted, glanced at her, then me, then back to the floor. The room held its breath with him. That, sometimes I wish I could stay with Daddy more, he said. But I don't say that out loud. 'Cause then she gets really quiet and says I don't love her enough. I felt something inside me collapse. Not anger. Not yet. It was grief. The kind of grief that comes when you realize your child has been learning to lie to keep peace. To perform love so that a parent won't break. I didn't look at her. ICOULDN single quotes T. If I did, I wasn't sure I'd be able to keep still. And this wasn't about me. Not anymore. Dr. Carson nodded. That must feel very confusing. My son nodded back. It makes me feel like I have to pick one. And I don't want to pick. Then he did something that hit harder than any sentence he could have spoken. He reached out and took my hand. His fingers were small, warm, trembling. In that simple gesture, in that fragile connection, years of doubt, guilt, and shame began to lift from my chest. Like dust being carried out through a window, cracked open just enough to let in spring air. Still, I said nothing, because I knew the weight of silence now. How it can be louder than shouting. How it can hold power if you let it settle in the right places. She cleared her throat, tried to recover. I didn't know he felt that way. I thought I was doing what was best. Dr. Carson nodded slowly, carefully. Often, when we're in pain, we protect ourselves by convincing others of our version of the truth. But children, they feel more than they speak, and they carry more than they should. It was the first time I saw her shrink, not physically, but something in her presence, the control she always carried like a polished badge. It dimmed. Her expression softened, her shoulders curled inward. And suddenly, the woman who had spent months painting me as a villain looked small. Still, I said nothing, because I had learned, in the most brutal way, that sometimes justice isn't served by accusation, but by clarity. And now, the clarity was undeniable. That night, after the session, I drove in silence. My son slept in the back seat, still clutching that blue dinosaur, his breath deep and even. I kept looking at him in the rearview mirror. His face was calm, untouched by the chaos of adults. For the first time in a long time, he looked safe. Didn't call anyone, didn't message a soul. I sat at home after putting him to bed, replaying his words in my head again and again, writing them down, word for word, because I knew what I had to do next. Not rage, not retaliation, no angry posts, no emails, something quieter. Smarter. I started collecting everything. Dates, notes, patterns, language, messages, all the subtle ways she had manipulated the narrative. All the indirect pressures placed on a child not old enough to understand the word emotional hostage, but who lived it daily. I consulted a new lawyer, one who specialized in psychological custody evaluations. I scheduled follow-up sessions with Dr. Carson, individually for my son and for myself. And slowly, methodically, I began preparing a case, but not just a legal one, not an emotional one. Case not to destroy her, but to remove her grip from the levers. She was pulling through our son, because she was about to realize something terrifying for someone. Like her, control doesn't survive the truth, and it was already beginning to spread. It's a strange kind of heartbreak when you realize someone's love for your child isn't unconditional, but strategic. Over the next few weeks, I watched carefully. Not like a man waiting to pounce, but like a father watching shadows move across the walls of his son's mind, trying to trace their source. The session with Dr. Carson hadn't changed her. Not really, but it changed something else. The way the professionals around us started to see. She was more cautious now. A little less composed during our co-parenting exchanges. Her voice was still sweet, her words still clean, but there were cracks. I saw the tightness behind her eyes, the tremble in her hand when she signed forms at school, the rushed tone in her emails, short, clipped, reactive. Control, I learned, doesn't vanish. It fights, it scrambles. But now I had all eyes. Dr. Carson started writing notes. His reports became part of our custody file. My new lawyer advised patience. We don't just want to prove she's manipulative, she said. We need to show the environment he's living in. Let it speak for itself. So I waited. And the deeper I looked, the more I found. Like how she'd requested that the school notify only her about behavioral issues, even though joint custody required shared communication. Or how she'd instructed his teachers not to include me in classroom updates, to avoid confusion for the child. There were records, emails, dates. Then came the therapy homework. Dr. Carson had given our son small drawing prompts to help him process. One day, he drew 2 houses. One was full of windows, open doors. Son. The other had no windows, just a tall wall. No light, he labeled them. Dad's house, Mom's house. When Dr. Carson asked what the difference was, my son said, "At Daddy's, I can say how I feel." That was when the final piece clicked into place. It wasn't just emotional confusion. It was emotional conditioning. She had been shaping his perception of safety, of loyalty, of love, to orbit around her own wounds, teaching him that love meant pleasing her. That truth was dangerous unless filtered through her approval. And it was working, until at WASN afternoon. During drop-off, she knelt to speak to him. I stood a few feet away, not listening. Not at first, but I caught one sentence. "Don't tell Dr. Carson what Mommy says at home, okay? It's private." My son glanced at me, just for a second, and something in his eyes broke me. It was fear. Quiet, small, but real. And he nodded. I didn't say a word then. I let it pass. But I texted my lawyer before I got back in the car. That was the line between protection and manipulation, between a mother and a puppeteer, and I wasn't going to let her pull the strings anymore. Dr. Carson filed an official concern, a statement for the court about coaching and emotional enmeshment. My lawyer drafted the request for a custody reevaluation with emphasis on psychological welfare. We gathered everything. Statements from the school, therapy drawings, voicemails she didn't realize were saved. It was no longer about opinion. It was evidence. And then, one rainy Thursday, during a court-mandated co-parenting meeting, the judge requested a follow-up therapy session. This time, recorded. She didn't object. She should have, because in that session, my son would say something even more devastating than before. And this time, she wouldn't recover from it. The air in the room felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the weight of what had built up over months. Or maybe it was the fact that this session, unlike the last, had a court observer present in the corner. quietly taking notes while pretending not to exist. She wore her usual armor, pale blouse, tailored jeans, that necklace she always touched when nervous. Her smile was as polished as ever, but her fingers never stopped moving, tapping, twisting, folding and unfolding a tissue on her lap like it held the power to undo everything coming. Our son sat between us again. Same small shoulders, same blue. Dinosaur. But something was different in him. A kind of resolve. The innocent kind that comes when a child decides to be brave, not because he wants to be, but because no one else will do it for him. Dr. Carson began gently. Last time, you told us how you feel at each home. That was very helpful. Thank you for being so honest. My son nodded. I want to ask something else today, Dr. Carson continued. What do you think happens when you say something that makes Mommy upset? My boy hesitated. Then, without looking at her, he whispered, She cries, and tells me Daddy's going to take me away if I don't love her more. It was so quiet, you could hear the breath catch in her throat. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just froze, eyes fixed on him like she'd just been struck. He kept going. She says Daddy only wants to win, that he doesn't really care about us, that he'll disappear again, like last time. I closed my eyes for a second. Last time, the week I wasn't allowed to see him because she claimed he was too emotionally unstable from visiting me. But that's not true. He added quickly, He never disappears. He always shows up. That was the moment. The moment she broke. She shook her head, slowly at first, then faster, her voice low and tight. I didn't mean it like that. I was scared. I was just trying to protect. But her words collapsed under the weight of the truth. Dr. Carson held up a hand, not to scold, but to calm. We're not here to place blame, he said. We're here to protect him. And right now, what he's describing is a burden he shouldn't have to carry. She turned to me then, not with anger, but something closer to grief. He doesn't understand what I've been through, she said, tears finally coming. I was terrified of losing him, of losing everything. I didn't know how else to hold on. And for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had once loved, not the version she had become, not the image she tried so hard to protect, but the woman beneath all of it, fractured, afraid, still holding a sword in one hand and a wound in the other. But the damage had been done. The judge saw the transcript. The psychologist filed his formal recommendation, a temporary shift in primary custody, therapeutic intervention for our son, and monitored sessions for her until further notice. It wasn't vengeance. It was balance, a correction. I didn't celebrate. There was no victory lap, just the quiet relief of knowing that the story, our story, was no longer written by fear or control, but by truth. She stopped fighting after that. Or maybe she just got tired. We moved into something that resembled peace, not because she admitted fault, but because she could no longer deny the cost. I never spoke ill of her to our son. I didn't have to. He knew now. And that was enough. Time passed. He grew. The questions came less often. The drawings changed. More sun, more space. He laughed more, slept better. And one evening, as I tucked him into bed, he whispered something. I'll carry for the rest of my life. Thanks for waiting for me to be ready to talk. That night, I stood outside his room, hand on the doorframe, tears in my eyes, and let myself finally breathe, because sometimes justice isn't loud. A child finally sleeping in peace. Time is a quiet healer. It doesn't erase pain, but it softens the corners in memory. It dulls the sharpness, fills in the hollow spaces with new meaning, new growth. It's been 2 years since that session, since the day my son chose to speak for himself and unknowingly set both of us free. Things aren't perfect. They never will be. But perfection was never the goal. Peace was. The court eventually granted me primary custody, not as a punishment to her, but as a protection for him. She still sees him regularly, but with boundaries. The kind that weren't there before. The kind he understands now. Not as a child manipulated by guilt, but as a boy learning what love actually feels like. He's 9 now. And the other day, after soccer practice, we sat in the car with the windows down, the smell of grass and sweat and early spring filling the air. He looked at me, hair sticking to his forehead, face flushed with sun and joy, and asked, "Do you think I'll be a good dad one day?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the boy. I had fought for Dot, not in court, Dot not with lawyers, but in the quiet ways that mattered, by listening, by staying, by never turning his heart into a battleground for adult grief. "You're already more than halfway there," I finally said, "because you know how important it is to love with truth." He smiled. "You taught me that." And I knew then that every sleepless night, every doubt, every silent restraint had been worth it, because he was okay, Dot he was himself, Dot, as for her. I don't hate her, Dot. It took me a long time to say that honestly. I don't excuse what she did. I never will. But I also see now what I couldn't back then, that her actions were driven by fears so deep, so untreated, it bled into every corner of her motherhood. She still carries it, I think, quietly, carefully. But I also think she's learning. Maybe his words woke something in her. Too, Dot, maybe not. But that's not my story to write anymore. This is I. I'm a father, Dot, not a perfect one, but a present one. And that presence steady, unwavering, honest, is the reason my son knows the sound of his own voice. The reason he will never again whisper the truth to a wall. Asterisk, asterisk. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel. It really helps. Click the video on the screen and I'll see you there.